All right, thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. Do us a favor, subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the bell for notifications, comment down below, and of course, upvote the video itself. I'm here with Brantley Sanderson. We're talking Little Lady Rebs basketball as they get ready for the Sweet 16. This is going to air on Thursday, so that would be tomorrow. How you doing, Brantley?
Man, I'm feeling really sweet today to go from 0-16 to the Sweet 16. I mean, you can't find many better stories in basketball right now than that. So I'm really excited.
Yeah, and whenever I left Ole Miss and left Oxford, Mississippi, and moved away, it was 2007. So it was right after that run by Carol Ross and Armini Price and all those girls. To go to the Elite Eight, they eventually got beat by the Tennessee Vols. Tennessee won the national championship, which they were prone to do back in the day. But after that, we hit a little bit of a valley. I mean, all of that happened. Well, I think it was Adrian Wiggins when he came in. Probation followed. And that led to that 0-16 season to where Coach Yo basically inherited a team that was not even really D1 level. And she has slowly built this over time, and they've recruited and they've hit the transfer portal. And now you look at them, they're like 24-8, something like that, give or take. I may be a little bit off, but half of their losses are to top 5 teams. And yet they're still looked at as an 8 seed. They were not ranked during the whole season. This team has been criminally underrated throughout this whole process. And now just might be another step on that journey because I'm assuming everybody thinks that Louisville is going to win this game as well.
Totally. I mean, first of all, they were criminally underseeded. This team is way better than an 8 seed. But I think that's also, that probably has just as much to do with how the SEC was just underrated this year. There was a lot of talk that that SEC was just South Carolina and LSU this year. Well, anybody that was paying attention knew that there was a lot better teams because, it was just a dogfight every single night. And like you said, this team has 0 bad losses. I mean, the only one that you might put in that category was the overtime loss to Auburn. But Auburn went to the WNIT, so they're a postseason team. And, sometimes the important thing is the team learned from that loss. And you saw them the next time they had an overtime game on an opponent's home court, they won. And that's what I really like about this team. At the beginning of the year, I was excited, but I really had no idea how all these pieces were going to come together. Like you said, she really hit the transfer portal hard. So there were some new pieces that, you just don't know how they're going to turn out. But they have really, she always said she wanted her team to be playing their best basketball in February and March. And that's exactly what they're doing.
Yeah, and the one concerning thing that I've seen going forward, and I think this is absolutely correctable and it's going to work itself out, but the team had a tendency to play tight in the fourth quarter, and that happened against Stanford as well. They made one basket in the fourth quarter. If it wasn't for good free throw shooting, Stanford might have come all the way back and won that game. Luckily for Ole Miss, the game was in its defense's hands. They needed to defend and make a play, and they were much more comfortable doing that. They did what they normally do, and that is force a turnover, a bad pass, something out of the ordinary for the Stanford Cardinal, and this Ole Miss team was able to pull away, and you could see them almost exhale. Brantley, do you think if in this Louisville game, Ole Miss has a 7-point lead in the fourth quarter, do you think they will tighten up even more, or will we see a little more looser team?
No, I think, now they've been there. I don't think you can understate how big of a deal that win was to go on Stanford's home court, a number 1 seed, a team that has been to the Sweet 16 since, I think, 2008. They've been in the national championship game 2 out of the last 3 years. They won one of those. And they had a lot of players still on that team. I mean, both of their All-Americans had all of that experience. They played South Carolina earlier this year and took them to overtime. But I know that exact moment that you're talking about in the fourth quarter. I think it was with about 4 or 5 minutes left. You could just see it showed on all of their faces and in their body language that it was starting the doubt might have been starting to creep in. But whatever Coach Yo told them in that timeout, she pressed the right buttons, and you could, like, just like you said, it was like they almost just excelled. Um, I think with Louisville, they are a very similar team. Um, the thing that I liked most about what we did with Stanford is from the tip off, we set the tone. Stanford was never comfortable. They did make that little run at the end, but I think as soon as they tied it, we went right back down and hit a shot and maintained the lead. It might have been the only shot we had, the only field goal we had in the whole fourth quarter, but that's when going 10 of 12 from the free throw line is going to help you. But that was also on their home court. This is going to be in Seattle. I'm sure Louisville travels well. They're a team that's got a ton of experience. They've been to the Final Four. I think they went last year, if I'm not mistaken. So their players have been there. Now I think, what's really interesting, I think if you look back maybe, 3 years ago when they went to the WNIT, there's been a lot of talk on Twitter about how both Ole Miss and Colorado were two of the final teams that went to the whatever the WNIT's Final Four is. That experience laid the groundwork for what you're seeing now, which is it's interesting if you look at a team like Duke and Kara Lawson, who I think has done a really good job in the 2 or 3 years that she's been there. They turned down the WNIT invitation last year. They just lost on their home court at the very end of the game. So I think you can kind of see how that experience, there's no substitute for it. When you have that much on the line, your entire season is on the line at the end of the game like that, you can't simulate that in practice. So yeah, I think the fact, that they've got that experience to draw on. And again, I think the SEC, we've got 4 SEC teams in the Sweet 16. The conference schedule prepared those teams in a way that these other teams have just not seen. The ACC with Louisville, they've had a bit of a down year. I think they only have maybe 2 or 3 teams, and they had several teams in the top 25 all year long. So I would much rather go into this game with that SEC schedule experience than an ACC schedule experience. But yeah, that they, talking about Louisville, they're very similar. They've got a lefty point guard, Haley Van Lith. She was a honorable mention All-American. I mean, she's really, really a good player. But there's a lot of similarities in terms of athleticism. They don't shoot a lot of threes, neither do we. But we've got players who can make them. And they're just really physical and tough down low. They're not going to, overwhelm you with size. They're not a South Carolina, or they're not a Stanford who starts, 6'4" and 6'5" and 6'6". So I think it's going to be close. I think the styles are really, really similar. They both like to play hard defense and run up and down the court and share the ball. So it's going to be really interesting to see who comes out on top of that.
Yeah, what's the road forward for Coach Yo and the Lady Rebs, though?
Look, I was thinking about this earlier today. I can't think of another win that is more important for the trajectory of a program. I mean, the entire basketball world, not just women's college basketball, it was the lead story on ESPN Sunday night. The entire world was talking about Coach Yo. I mean, you can't, the interviews that she gave afterwards, especially when she was so emotional. I mean, when you've got other fan bases who are just straight up rooting for her online, like she's really taken this moment and brought people along this journey with her. She's so transparent. She's talked about the struggles. And I think people were really rooting for her to get this win. And players want to play for her. Like, how could you not watch that game and watch her enthusiasm and her excitement and the way she loves her players and the way her players reacted to her after the game? That's the kind of coach that players want to play for. So I think in terms of the trajectory, this just gives us a level of exposure that we haven't had, in the modern era. And I think people, again, there were a lot of doubters that after, the Shakira Austin, our lottery pick from last year, graduated, that to me was the real test of, can you sustain this? Is this just a good team, or is this a good program? And I think she's proven that this is what we can come to expect now from this program.
Yeah, and Coach O had a amazing quote whenever she just said that I was not the first call that Ole Miss made, but I was the right call. And I love that confidence that probably is enthusiastic to her players. Everybody can sense that, but the footing that she's on right now is unbelievable. It probably not since Carol Ross, honestly, has any Ole Miss women's basketball coaches really been there. But the gold standard for Ole Miss is always going to be Van Chancellor. That era. How sustainable is this, and how close is Coach O to getting Ole Miss back to that level?
I think we're right there knocking on the door, where this, going to the second round and beyond of the tournament every year is going to be the expectation. I think what's different now is the parity. And you're starting to see that. We weren't the only 8 seed that beat a number 1. I think actually Miami was a 9 seed. They beat number 1 Virginia Tech on their home court the next night. That's the first time that's happened. A number 1 seed didn't make it to the second round, I think, since 2009. So that's just a reflection of transfer portal, NIL. It's just a lot easier to build a program and build it quickly. And I think now she's really gotten over that hump with, whether it's the signature win or the attention that comes from it. She knows how to use her wins as building blocks for what's next. She proved that last year with the class that she brought in from the transfer portal. I'm really, I'm trying not to look ahead because this is so much fun for right now, but I'm really excited to see how I think it'll be very telling how this translates into who comes in next, because she's got a really, really good high school. She's not one of those, she's used the transfer portal very well, but she recruits high school very, very well. The only freshman on the team, Ayanna Thompson, true freshman, she hit 3 threes in the first half. She was the difference. The halftime score was 29-20. That was her. She's been slowly developing all year long. And I think Coach O said it. She was just ready for her moment. And something that Coach O said before is, she doesn't really get the 5 stars. She gets the 3 and 4 stars and develops them so that they're 5 stars by the time they're gone. And I think that player development is really, really, really key. She's able to take that into recruiting and say, look at Marquisha Davis. When she was at Arkansas, she might have only started a handful of games. Now she's averaging double figures, and that was only a year ago. So when you're able to take that and show players what you do with their talent, and how much better they will be when they leave your program, it's hard to compete with that if you're another school.
Yeah, thank you for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. Make sure you check out our brand new podcast, Locked On College Basketball. Everything you need to know about college basketball in one place. Plus, you get to hear from big-name experts, insiders, coaches, and players. Ole Miss is relevant on that show right now with the hiring of Chris Beard. But if you want women's college basketball, you can go to Locked On Women's College Basketball. We have that show as well, and I'm sure Ole Miss is relevant on that as well. It's Locked On College Basketball and Locked On Women's College Basketball, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Thank you, Brantley, so much for stopping by. Hopefully next week we can do this again, getting ready for a Final Four.
Oh, man, that's the dream. I can't wait.
All right, take care, buddy.
All right, thank you.